Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This right over here is Tim, and this is Second Legacy. And first of all, thank you so much for watching this video. This is a collaboration between Tim and I. You might know me from Langley Outdoors Academy. You might know him from Military Arms Channel. But on Second Legacy, we are driving deeper conversations to pass the blessing of the Second Amendment along to the next generation in a specific way that really enables you and empowers you to have these conversations. And that is the entire purpose. Now, last night, we had President Biden. He had his State of the Union address. And of course, you know gun control is going to be in there. But we picked out a few of the things here that you guys not only saw, but some of the things you didn't see. And we want to add a little bit of color to the conversation because this is some important stuff. Before we get into this first clip, Tim, how are you doing? How's life? What's up, my man?
Everything's going good. Everything's going good. I had to sit through the State of the Union address, and we were online chatting through the thing, and it was painful. It was painful.
It was. It was. If you guys could have been in that text thread.
Yes. Yeah. Probably should have been on Signal.
Yeah, it's true. We probably should have been more isolated. But there's a few things that we're going to dive in because, like I said, I'm not going to subject you guys to this entire thing because this was an hour and 13 minutes. But this is the first thing that we're going to talk about before I show you a clip of some of the gun control pieces that he threw in here. This speech was an hour and 13 minutes. Well, that's a lot longer than traditional State of the Union speeches. But only 2 minutes and 13 seconds of it was devoted to gun control. And that's a very important thing. And I kind of want to set up camp there because one of the things, and Tim, you'll be able to know this as well from your history and your experience, when they're pushing gun control ultra hard, it's going to be more than 2 minutes in an hour and 13. I mean, am I way off base or is that they're reading into something there?
That's absolutely correct. It was rather shocking that he didn't spend more time on the topic. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that truly signals, but the fact that he spent so little time talking about it was pretty interesting.
Right. And so one of the things that I find so fascinating is the tiny little nuances of when they deliver things, how they deliver them, and what they focus on. And something that the gun control lobby, Moms Demand Action, Every Time for Gun Safety, Giffords.org, the things that they want, they always want their red shirts, Moms Demand Actions behind whatever politician it is. They always want their talking points. They want it very precise. Giffords.org, founded by Gabby Giffords, survivor of mass shooting situation. All of these things, they do it every single time. They're very good on message. But I thought that was so interesting how only 2 minutes made it into that speech. And a lot of it was not about anything of this. But that's just something I noticed. Let us know in the comments below what you guys think. But we're going to dive into clip number 1, Mr. Producer, and then we're going to break that down.
Do something. Do something. That was the plea of parents who lost their children in Uvalde. I met with every one of them. Do something about gun violence. Thank God. Thank God we did. Passing the most sweeping gun safety law in 3 decades. That includes things like that the majority of responsible gun owners already support. Enhanced background checks for 18 to 21 years old. Red flag laws, keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others.
Take us away, Tim. I know it's in there.
Yeah. So first he starts off by calling for more gun control and then thanks God that he passed it. So it's like, what are you saying here?
Right.
I remember when he was promoting this piece of legislation and when it got passed, of course, he went out there and did a victory lap and talked about how great it was and how this is going to save so many lives. Mm-hmm. And yet he's sitting here talking about another incident in California. Well, this incident in California took place after you passed this landmark legislation that was supposed to save us all.
Exactly.
Talk about circular arguments and logic. I mean, it's absolutely stunning that I wouldn't expect him to catch much of anything. Whoever wrote his speech, assuming he stayed on script. I mean, come on, a high school, debate student could do a better job writing a speech than this. This is just unbelievably weird.
Oh, you're 100% right. And so even dive in deeper on that point. If you're watching this, the things that we're trying to dive into here, this is key. This is key to what they're saying and undermining their entire point because they are cyclical. They talk in a circle. As Tim was mentioning, they literally said in the same sentence, We need more gun control because gun control is clearly something to solve all of our problems. In fact, we passed the most sweeping gun control 3 months ago. Okay, so what is it? Do we need more gun control, or is the gun control you passed effective enough? Because you can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it too. In fact, the piece of legislation that he's hitting on is the Senate Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. That is the red flag funding and the increase for background checks from 18 to 20-year-olds. Now, the big irony here is when they say there's funding for red flag laws on a national federal level, they're not telling you that all of the funding has to go to states that actually include something called due process in their red flag law legislation, which means almost every single state that doesn't have due process, which is a majority of them because red flag laws violate due process, they don't get that money. So the whole thing he's building this castle of sand on is more sand. And that's before we even get into the 18 to 20 and the ATF. And I know you know a lot about that.
Yeah. And I also, while I have it on the top of my mind, it kind of buttresses the point that we've been making all along. There is no single piece of legislation they're going to be content with unless that legislation is an outright complete ban on every gun on the planet, especially in the United States, and full confiscation. Anytime they come at you and say, we just want reasonable restrictions, we're just going to pass something that all gun owners, reasonable gun owners can agree on. This is just all we want is just this reasonable piece of legislation. Just give us what we're asking for. And the minute they get it, they move right on to the next ask and the next ask. Mm-hmm. And it's not really an ask, it's a demand, but we just don't give into it. So again, this little clip drives home, and this conversation drives home the point that they're not going to stop. No matter what you give them, they're going to come right back to that well for more. And usually it's within weeks or months after they get what they want. In this case, he got his anti-gun law passed, and he's coming right back to the well saying, hey, guys, we need more.
Oh, 100%. In fact, I mean, just to strike a little bit more memory, Chris Murphy came out literally the day it passed and said, this is a good starting point. That is a direct quote. And Chris Murphy is the guy who drives all the gun control in the Senate. Now, one thing before we go into the second clip, which Tim just set up masterfully, by the way, one of the things that's important is we cover these things in this amount of depth, and we cover these things really to drive home the fact that we can affect the change to stop a lot of the things that they are pushing forward. When we say they want to do these things, when we say they will not give up, when we say they are consistently going back to the well, as Tim mentioned, they can do that all day long. But if we are united and if we are activating and we are actually putting forth the effort to get into the political process, they will not succeed. And that's an incredibly important piece. And with that, from what Tim said, keep in mind what Tim said about coming back and phrasing different things and talking about different types of firearms. Mr. Producer, can you put up number 2, the second clip from President Biden?
2 weeks ago, during the Lunar New Year celebrations, you heard the studio door close, and you saw a man standing there pointing a semi-automatic pistol at him. He thought he was going to die, but he thought about the people inside. And in that instant, he found the courage to act and wrestled a semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman who had already killed 11 people in another dance studio. 11. He saved lives. It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now.
You got this.
Yeah, I mean, seriously. He's talking about a semi-automatic pistol. And then he goes into a rip on ban assault weapons. Mm-hmm. I mean, he needs to get his terminology correct here because, if you're going to go out there and preach to people about we want to ban your stuff, at least get the phrasing correct. Semi-automatic pistol and this and that. And look, folks, we're not trying to downplay the tragedy here. This has nothing to do with the actual incident. This has to do with passing laws or trying to pass laws. And we in the Second Amendment community constantly face these attacks against our constitutionally protected right. And could you imagine every time a drunk driver killed somebody on a highway somewhere, wiped out an entire family in a minivan, that politicians got on the air and demanded that we ban alcohol again? I mean, it's asinine that they take these events because, as we've shown in previous videos, violent crime as a whole in the United States is going down, and that includes violent crime, that includes the misuse of firearms. So again, you have this fear mongering that what they're trying to drive home is that these assault weapons, with the air quotes, are just lurking behind any tree, waiting to jump out and commit gun violence against you at any moment. And the reality is there's no such thing as gun violence. The violence is tied to a human. A human is breaking the law. And tell me what law has ever been passed that a criminal didn't break? Mm-hmm. So they're using these events, which at a small level are horrible. They're tragic. I mean, if you look at them very narrowly, but if you look at violent crime in the United States holistically and compare it over decades of data, where we stand right now today as a nation, crime has really never been lower. Now we have spikes in crimes in cities because these cities are passing crazy laws, everything from defunding their police to just turning criminals loose on their own recognizance without even bail, no bail reform, all that stuff. And all that does is serve to drive crime in the cities because now these criminals feel empowered just to walk into Walgreens and just clean off the shelves because they're not going to enforce any law or arrest anybody. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at it, myopically, and you look very, narrowly at certain things can look really, really out of proportion. But again, I'm trying to get you guys to look at this holistically. And the argument at that point doesn't hold water. What they're demanding simply is just an infringement on rights. And when he's saying assault weapon, in the back of his mind, you know what he's thinking? The AR-15. And this has been a true statistic for many years. You're more likely to get beaten to death in a bar by hands and feet than be killed by a rifle of any type.
Any type, yeah.
Much less an AR-15 of any type. Mm-hmm. And so, again, if you look at individual instances, it looks really, really horrific. But if you back up and you take a look at the whole picture, you're more likely to die in your own swimming pool than you are to be killed by somebody wielding an AR-15 illegally. So I just wanted to. Yeah,
or even as he said in his own speech, fentanyl has almost 2 times as many deaths in the United States than actual guns. And that's across the board. That is statistically proven anywhere you want to see. The big statistic they talk about is between 48 and 50,000 Americans die at the hands of a gun, is what they say. Now, of course, this is just the methodology, but 70,000 in his own speech from fentanyl. So when you zoom out, again, to Tim's point, when you zoom out and you look at all of the ways and all of the honestly very morbid things that we have to look at to see the entire scope, it puts it into perspective. Not to mention the fact that of that 48,000 or 52,000, depending on which statistics you're using, half are suicides. And it's a terrible thing to talk about. We don't want any of this negative actions or outcomes on anybody. But at the end of the day, we have to look at what the numbers they're citing, and we have to be able to respond to it. And that's how we do it. Now, something else that Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You have to be very careful when looking at these numbers, too, because these anti-gun groups that cite numbers oftentimes will include justified shootings, people justifiably using deadly force to protect themselves, and also they'll include justified shootings by police officers. Mm-hmm. So they'll take all these numbers and throw them in and say, look how many people died by guns.
Yep.
And they leave out the fact that, like you said, over half will be suicides, and a good chunk of those will be justified shootings.
Yep. And they don't even talk about what is the actual circumstance and the context of what's going on. Like Gun Violence Archive is horrible about that. And that's the #1 cited source from media and politicians.
Yep. Absolutely true.
Yep. And the other thing that I really wanted to bring up, because you picked out something that I love that what you picked out. He said semi-automatic firearms. And the thing that's interesting about gun control and politicians, when they reiterate very specific phrases in the same cadence and the same definition, the same style, it usually means they're putting emphasis. And I thought it was very interesting that the same person who a couple of months ago said, we're sick and perverse that semi-automatics exist, they should be completely gotten rid of, semi-automatics. And then in his State of the Union, he says semi-automatics twice, followed up quickly with assault weapons bans. I found that interesting. I can't necessarily say like, oh, this leads to X, Y, Z. But I'll tell you, I did find that very interesting. I mean, I don't know. I thought the choice of phrase was interesting. But the other elephant in the room, he literally goes down and he's referring to this hero. And he is a hero. He saved lives. Yeah. But he's referring to everything that failed in California as the solution nationally. I mean, quite literally, he goes through the entire circumstance of what occurred. The firearm in question used by this terrible person was on the illegal weapons list of California. It was an assault weapons that should have been banned. You can't have a suppressor added onto this exact same thing in California. Also should have been banned. But then he goes and turns around and says assault weapon bans, just like California when it failed. It doesn't make sense. And it's so cyclical that I'll be honest, it's enough to drive you mad, to be quite honest.
Well, and another interesting point, and correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been several days since I've read any news articles about the Monterey Park tragedy. Yeah. But I believe the suppressor he used was homemade.
Oh yeah, it was.
So it just highlights the fact that this is an item that's banned specifically in California. You can't own it even if you wanted to. Mm-hmm. Yet there's a law banning it, but this person went out and made one because it's relatively easy to do. You can go to any hardware store and get all the components you need to do it. It's not like they're magical devices. They're very simple in nature. And yet, again, this drives home the point that criminals will be criminals. By their very definition, criminals break laws. So when you pass laws, they only affect the law abiding. And so when you pass nonsensical laws, you're punishing the law abiding, stripping them of their rights, and enabling the criminal. Because now you're giving them basically open season in a gun-free zone. How many times has one of these people gone into an area that has it posted no firearms? Almost always. That's why you see them carrying out these events in places where they're fairly confident they're not going to run up against somebody defending themselves. So
perfect example. That mall I think that mall was in Indiana, right? Greenbrier Mall, I think. That? I mean, you had an instance where someone who was constitutionally carrying their firearms stopped an incident and saved lives. And it was just like, whoa, hush, that's such an anomaly. I remember covering the news articles. No, that's crazy. No, don't look at that. The odds of that are so unlikely. It happened right there.
Yep.
And that's what we're really trying to drive home, because we can affect change, guys. But the reason and the way that we do it is through having these conversations that are flat out hard conversations sometimes, but we need to do it because this is how we pass it on to the next generation. Tim, you want to take us home?
Absolutely, folks. As Braden said, the whole point of this channel is to give you, the viewer, all the information you need to have a very well-informed discussion with your fellow family members, friends, coworkers, because we need dialogue in this country. We need to make it known to people that may not understand our constitutional rights and what they represent and why they're so important. And Second Legacy exists so we can enable our viewers to have the information that they need, coupled with current events, to have those discussions so that we can go and elect the proper officials and we can protect our second legacy for future generations. Folks, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for watching. And until the next time we see you guys, we'll talk to you soon.